It is my honor to introduce Dr. Lovrich, our invited guest speaker for Beto series. Dr. Lovrich received his undergraduate from Stanford University with cum laude and his master and PhD from UCLA. So he has been teaching in Washington State for over 30 years. That's why I'll always say that whenever he watches a Pac-10 sports, there's always a winning team. And Dr. Lovrich has been the director of Division of Governmental Studies and Services for many years. And that division provides research and evaluation for law enforcement agencies and state and federal levels. And therefore, that EGSS shop is the holy place for most of the graduate students at Washington State University, because we all want to get involved for two reasons. The first is we want to make some money to survive with graduate school, especially the tough summer money, the lean money when all the funding is dried up. You know, a couple $1,000 will save our lives. The second is we all want to get involved to get a data of our own for our dissertation of future publications. Dr. Lovrich also a prolific writer, scholar, and he has co-authored 9 books and over 160 referee journal articles. Most of those articles are published with his students. And incidentally, his most recent article has been published in Social Science Quarterly, one of the top journals in sociology, not in his area of political science, public administration, and criminal justice. And he has got many numerous grants in the past 30 years, totaling over $15 million. And there are over 6 or 8 students are regularly working for him. So he has chaired over the years 28 PhD dissertation committees. Those students graduated under him, including Nancy Rodriguez. She got her undergraduate here and received her alumni award last year from this college. And also Michael Rising. Both of them are faculty members at Arizona State University. As a graduate, as a graduate student, we all know when we finish the comprehensive exam, we really want to write a big book and test big theories, right? And that's no exception in my case. So now I give a case study of myself before I turn to law. So when I finish my comprehensive, I start working on my big book, and I want to test all the theories. However, when I was halfway through, all my plans fell apart. It happened all the time in graduate school. Fell apart. I didn't have the data. So there's an old saying in Chinese that you can plan to kill a dragon, but there's no dragon in the world. So I have big theory, but I don't have the data to test. What I have seen is all the deers and the chickens in the field. So I'll hang up there. Dr. Lovrich helped me with the data, and invite me to join this research team to conduct a national survey of police chiefs and municipal clerks. 15 years later, it turned out to be like 5 waves in longitudinal data. Last month, I got a call from Joe Gardner from Bureau of Justice Statistics, and he's in charge of next wave of Lima survey, law enforcement management administrative statistics. And he told me at Hawaii, American University did a review of police research on organizations for National Science Foundation, and he found that more articles have been published using Dr. Lovrich's data than 5 waves of Lima study. So I'm indebted to Dr. Lovrich's generous support and mentoring. Having giving a case study of my own, and I hope to return the best part to Dr. Lovrich.
Well, I want to thank Dennis Longmire, Professor Longmire, for the invitation. I want to thank Solomon for the nomination, and I deeply appreciate the honor. The people that have come before me in this series and the people that come after will be a lot more mainline criminal justice. I'm not a criminal justician, but I have, in a lot of ways, come to be a criminal justice person looking at the field from the outside. And sometimes it's more helpful to be a little bit apart than to be in the mainstream, to see things that are not so obvious to people who are in the middle of a phenomenon. In some ways, I think it's like John Beto himself. He wasn't a corrections person. He wasn't from that discipline. His discipline was separate from. But he could see the problems of the Texas corrections system in a way that people hadn't been able to see before. And he will be like a convert to the area. And I think that's what I've been a little bit for criminal justice. I'm a person trained in political science and public administration, and I can see the connections between my discipline and criminal justice in a way that most criminal justice people are not able to see. Walking George is a legacy. Whoa, that was remarkable. Just came on board. Walking George left a legacy in the field of corrections, in the Texas criminal justice system, and at Sam Houston State University. And I think you have a treasure in his memory and in his lasting impacts. But maybe his deeper legacy was noted by Norman Carlson. He wrote a little piece on this book. This is a book about Walking George, and I think his tribute is pretty touching. He says, perhaps his greatest legacy are the many individuals whose lives he influenced, both those who worked and studied under him, as well as those confined to his custody. So in my own way, I've sought my own legacy in my career in academia and in Washington State University. In the lives of the students I've been able to teach in my classes and mentor through their graduate studies and getting them ready for their job in the professorate. So what I would like to talk about today is for two audiences. One audience is the students looking for a mentor, and the other audience is professors looking to be mentors for students. Because I think without a mentor, it's extremely difficult to navigate a successful life in a university setting. If that's your goal, is to become a teacher and to become a scholar and to become a contributor to our fund of knowledge, the people that precede you are learning lessons that you can't learn without talking to them, hearing from them, and processing their experience and integrating it into your own. To my way of thinking, everybody's background is different. Everybody's experience is different. When you pick a mentor, that person has to be sensitive to your needs. When you are mentoring, you have to be sensitive to your students' needs. It's not easy to develop that sensitivity, and everybody develops it in their own way. So what I want to share with you today is what I think are useful ideas for picking a mentor and for being a mentor. And I want to condition what I say in this way. Everybody's experience prepares them to be sensitive to some things and not so sensitive to others. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and experience that I think are important factors for you to reflect on and see if it's something like this has happened to you, or you have this experience in your background, and what advantage I saw in having that experience for developing the ability to mentor. I don't want to claim to be a great mentor, but I have a lot of students who tell me I am, and I've never really thought about it until I started reflecting late in my career. Why have I done the work that I've done in the way I've done it? And it turns out there's a big part of me that needs to be working with students in a close way and watching them progress in their careers. I'm very proud to say that my students have far exceeded me in my accomplishments. Solomon is one. Dennis, these are remarkable people you're bringing here to build your program. And then having Courtney and Travis join in, and there'll be more, you're going to achieve that ranking that you're heading for in your program. I just know it. This place is a remarkable place. I've only been here a day and a half. The possibilities that can grow from the kind of research I'm going to talk about are endless, really, boundless. Background. My background is immigrant parents. My parents come from Yugoslavia. Neither of them went beyond the 5th grade in education. I'm a first-generation college goer. And what I take from that is a special kind of naive belief that the university is a special place. My parents are smarter than I am, but they never had the opportunity to get an education. They have a lot more insight than I'll ever have about the value of education. So when I went to college, it was a great treat, and I still think it's a great treat for anybody that gets to go. And I'll never forget one day, a treasured colleague of mine and I were fishing, and in a canoe on a lake in eastern Washington, Saturday morning. And his name is Chuck Sheldon, Charles Sheldon. He's a fantastic scholar of court systems. And he said, "You know what? We're the luckiest people in the world." And I said, "What do you mean, Chuck?" And I'm an untenured faculty member trying to get enough publications to make tenure, and I'm thinking, God, oh, what a terrible life this is. You know, I'm always working and never having a time off. He says, "No, you don't realize that for the rest of your life, you get to be surrounded by young people. You get to think about ideas and research. No one tells you what to do. You choose what you want to work on, and you get paid to do that. I hope the people of the state of Washington never find out how much fun we're having at this job." And that's the right attitude to have. It's a very special privilege to be in school. It's a special privilege even more to go to graduate school, and then to become a teacher of people experiencing that special part of their life is that's a heck of a wonderful profession to be in. So I think I probably have that naive feeling because my parents didn't have that privilege, and I got that privilege, and I still see the magic in it. Secondly, I had a mentor in the 5th grade. He was a teacher and a coach, a baseball coach. His name is Clayton Lilly. And I never thought much about Mr. Lilly, except at the time I knew that there was something about him that I really admired, and he saw something in me that nobody else had seen. I was very shy, only child. My parents taught me Croatian rather than English in the home, and I learned English as a second language. And he saw in me a shy kid, but a kid that had some talent at something, baseball in that case. And so he developed that talent. He made me a member of the team. I didn't really want to be involved in it, but I had some talent at it. And I went on to Stanford University on a baseball scholarship. I never probably would have gone to Stanford if I hadn't been touched by Mr. Lilly. And he touched me in other ways. He gave me confidence in the classroom, and he gave me confidence that I could make good decisions about friends and baseball and so on. When last year I got an award from the American Political Science Association for mentoring, and I was interviewed by the public relation person at Washington State University for a story, and she's been there as long as I have, 30-some years. And she's doing the interview, and she said, "Who was your mentor?" And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about. Who touched you early in your life?" And I thought back, oh yeah, Clayton Lilly, Mr. Lilly. He says, everybody I've interviewed over 35 years who's won a mentoring award has somebody as an elementary school teacher of influence. Every mentor had a mentor before. Think about your experience. What was that person, if you were lucky enough to have someone early in your life that helped you figure out which way you wanted to go? Found something in you that you wouldn't have developed without that help. And then think what made them special. If you have someone like that, reflect on that experience. And you don't know it, but it's influencing how you're going to interact with the students that you have. Or if you're a student looking for a mentor, think about a person that has qualities similar to those that you found in others that helped you along the way. When I went off to college, I didn't really know what to do. I knew that I was going to play baseball because they were paying for my schooling, but I was in engineering. If you don't remember back this far, you weren't born yet. When the Russians put up Sputnik, the fact that their science and engineering enabled them to put something in orbit over the planet scared the living daylights out of the United States. You say, how could that country have succeeded? And we started promoting science and engineering, giving lots of money to universities, by the way, to promote science and engineering. And in schools like the Los Angeles City School System, they began tracking students. Anybody that had an aptitude for science and engineering then was tracked into classes that were appropriate for preparing you to be an engineer. So I was tracked, and I was sent to Stanford to play baseball and to study electrical engineering. The two don't go together. You can't do the traveling to play baseball and then do the engineering. So they sent me to a counseling center and said, "What's wrong with you? How can you be here as an electrical engineer person and you're a baseball player?" I said, "Well, I have no idea. I'm just here. This is what I'm doing." They said, "Well, didn't your parents tell you?" I said, "Well, my parents never went to college. They don't have any idea." I went to a school that's pretty working class school. Very little, few of the kids went on to college. This was San Pedro High School. 80% of the kids there did not go to college. They went into longshoring or fishing or factory work or something, but they weren't college bound. So I had a lot of advice from people I didn't know who were expert at giving advice, and said, you need to be in the social sciences. And I said, "I don't even know what that is." "Well, you speak languages, you're interested in history, you're interested in politics." "Yeah." "Okay, how about international relations is a major for you? This is an interdisciplinary area of study, and you can take the courses and play baseball and keep your scholarship and everything will be fine." So I got a mid-course correction, I like to call it, away from engineering into social science, and that was because people, again, saw something in me I didn't know was important to develop and bring out. And as a international relations major, you're encouraged to study abroad. And I went to study at the Stanford's campus in Florence, in Firenze. And that was another huge experience, very important. To be a student studying in another country where the language isn't your own and performing in a language that isn't your native tongue, that is hard work. And I have enormous respect, the word in Italian is simpatico. I think there's also a Spanish word, simpatico. I feel for the students from abroad that come to study here, especially graduate students who need to master discipline and master the language to communicate nuanced understanding in that discipline. That's a very, very hard task. And I think it's been really important for me as a mentor to be able to spend the time necessary to work with students who have English as a second language to develop their maximum ability. When I came out of Stanford, I went to graduate school at UCLA, and my area of study was public administration. I didn't really understand what a university life was like until I got to be a teaching assistant. And there's something about if you are a teacher and it's in your heart to be a teacher, once you get to teach students, you realize that that's going to be your profession. When you get students in the class and the professor's droning on and being boring, and then you have your section of 30 students that you get to interact with. If you're a teacher, that experience will be like a narcotic. You know, you have to have it. There's something about being able to work through material when people get it, and lights go on and go, that's why this is important. And you go, yeah, I helped make that happen. So these are all, I think, things to look for in yourself. Are you a teacher in that way? If you are, you're stuck. You're going to be a teacher. You're going to be a professor. It's going to be an important part of your life you can't live without. If you like to do research and you like to communicate that research to other people, a teaching position gives you a chance to do that your whole life. When you think through something, you read things that are interesting, and then you work it into your class. And you say, now there's another way to look at this. Some people think it's like this, and some people think it's like that. What do you think? And you try these things out with your students. And the students go, oh, that's interesting. Well, I'd like to write a paper about that. And then you build from that base. I think mentoring is about finding people that have that need to teach and nurturing it and developing it. Mostly in terms of what the work is that they're interested in and sharing with other people. That's what teaching is really critical skill. When I finished graduate school, my first job was at Metropolitan State University, and then University of Denver, and then DePauw University, all kind of wandering around, trying to find out what kind of an institution would be really good. I liked teaching, I liked research, and I liked the West, the American West. The further east I went, and my wife and I went, the more we said, you know, we need to get back to the West Coast. And I've been at Washington State University now for 34 years. Being where you can be happy is really important. To mentor somebody, to choose a mentor. Mentoring involves matching somebody to where they're going to be happy. Opportunities will arise, but you have to live someplace. Where you're living, if you're not happy in your living, it's really hard to be successful where you're working. When I got to WSU, there was an opportunity that few people have to touch a lot of people through a unit that Solomon described. It's an applied research unit in political science connected to criminal justice. And this is a land-grant university where one of the obligations of a public institution that has a land grant from the federal government is to do outreach to government, outreach to people, outreach to communities. The unit that has that responsibility is the Division of Governmental Studies and Services, and I've been the director of that since 1977. I'm retiring in 2 years, so I'm hoping the unit doesn't go away with me, because in a lot of ways, when you spend that much time in one place, a lot of your character gets translated to the institution, but I'm trying to make it institutionalized rather than personalized. In that role, in 1982, the Criminal Justice Department at Washington State University was reduced in status from a separate department. This is due to budget cuts in the state of Washington. And criminal justice came to political science as a program in political science. So from 1982 on, I had the opportunity of working with graduate students and a lot of undergraduate students in criminal justice, taking coursework in my area of study, which is public administration, public policy. I've been very, very fortunate. Extremely fortunate over the years since then of working with highly talented, resourceful, hardworking graduate students, particularly Solomon Zhao and Courtney Bell Franklin and Travis Franklin, and before them a couple others like Nancy Rodriguez. Now, these are all in terms of background to reflect. In picking a mentor or being a mentor, what's your life course? Where have you gone? What kinds of experiences opened the door for you to be simpatico with students in a deep way? That's really what mentoring, I think, is about. But my prepared remarks are really a little bit aside. This is the background of reflection on choosing a mentor or being a mentor. My prepared remarks are about a way of thinking about the work that you do in criminal justice that I think is really important. And you may remember nothing of what I say today, but I want you to remember this book. This is a book by Donald Stokes. The title is Pasteur's Quadrant. And I'll tell you a little bit why you should take that away and read that book when you can. The title of my address is Mentoring Doctoral Students, Finding Synergies of Theory and Practice in Pasteur's Quadrant. When Professor Longmire wrote to me an email and he said, Dr. Lovrich, I need a title. What are you going to talk about? I said, myself. He says, no, we're not interested in you. Maybe a little background, but keep it at a minimum. We were interested in some lofty thoughts that you have, reflecting on your career. And I said, I don't have any lofty thoughts. I'm a kind of a common man. He says, no, give me something. So I thought about this book. I didn't know about this book when it was first published. It was brought to my attention. And I've organized my thinking around this topic. This is what this book is about. In all applied areas of science, and criminal justice is an applied area, public administration is an applied area, there is a deep anxiety that the work you're doing is not as profound as the work being done in the pure disciplines. This is a feature of enmity, distrust, misunderstanding between physics and engineering, and it's between sociology and criminal justice, between political science and public administration. This feeling about the lesser status accorded people in applied areas, This is a very, very deep problem, deep-seated, historically deeply rooted problem that's beautifully explored in this book. And the problem of how to overcome that secondary status is explored in this book, and I want to talk a little bit about that. On my way here, I was at the Pullman airport at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's the only way you travel out of Pullman. And one of the people getting on a plane on his way to Paris was Gene Rosa. He's a sociologist at WSU, environmental sociologist. He's on the governing board of AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And he asked me where am I going, and I told him. And he said, well, that's interesting. You know, Jim Short was a visitor at Sam Houston State University. And I said, yeah, I'm going to the same place. He says, well, you know, you must be doing something good. What are you talking about? And I said, well, the topic I'm going to be addressing is finding synergies of theory and practice in Pasteur's Quadrant. He goes, wow, you know about that book? I said, yeah. I didn't know about it. It's written by political scientists, but I found out about it from another person I'm going to tell you about. Am I still on?
I've got equipment failing upstairs. It's going to come and go.
It's come and go? Okay, I'll try to throw my voice out. So I found out about this book from someone I'll tell you about in a second. He says, you know, we're talking about that book at AAAS because we think NSF, the National Science Foundation, should shift how it works, how its funding is given in light of the recommendation that Don Stokes makes in this book. So I'll tell you a little bit about what that is in a second. I found out about this book. This is published by Brookings Institution Press in 1997. The author, Donald Stokes, is a very famous person. He's a political scientist who studied American voting behavior. And the book, The American Voter, which changed political science forever, was co-authored by him and Campbell and Miller. Brilliant man. Became the dean of the graduate school at University of Michigan, and then he went to NSF. And he ran NSF for 10 years, and then he went to Princeton after that and passed away. He saw the benefit and the downside of organizing the National Science Foundation the way it's organized, and he figured out why it's organized that way and how to fix it. When I was in Spokane, WSU has a campus in Spokane as interim chancellor. We had made a decision as a university to bring a researcher to Spokane. And this researcher was at Walter Reed Army Hospital, head of research. And his area of research is sleep and performance. What function does sleep serve? And it's very, very integral to performance, but no one really understands the physiology, your brain chemistry, brain electrical activity that is promoted by sleep, and what pattern of sleep, and what's normal and what's abnormal. These are all matters of basic science. But the application of science is to performance. Think about accidents that happen. How many of them occur because somebody is not rested and is performing, making decisions at less than optimal level? Especially people conveying other people or driving trucks with hundreds of thousands of pounds of inertia behind them. Think about emergency medical people. Think about how hospitals are organized. All of this is is about decision-making under stress, and if rest isn't present, then you have a problem. One of the criminal justice professors, who's my colleague, and we brought him to WSU to work in this environment on sleep, is Brian Vila. He has a publication with the title Tired Cops, and it's about police and performance and sleep. If you look back, and he did this systematically at major bad shoots, that is where there was a life taken and a deadly force was used, and a subsequent investigation shows it was a misapplication of deadly force. In virtually every case, it's people working overtime, seniority, high seniority overtime, way past their ability to make good decisions. So why isn't the science that is getting better and better about patterns of sleep, individual differences and requirements and so on, interrupted and uninterrupted sleep, why isn't that science informing shifts and use of people and development of matching people's abilities to their assignment? This is what the Laboratory for Sleep Performance is doing at Washington State University with a lot of money from the federal government. So Dr. Greg Belenke is the director of this operation, and Brian Vila, Professor Vila, is doing research in law enforcement. The lab has sleeping quarters, so you can watch people over time. They can monitor the brain waves of the people involved, and they can put them in simulators, driving simulators, decision-making simulators, a lot like the simulation lab that you have on incident control. You can do the same kind of research in this facility. So when Dr. Belenke came on board and I was welcoming him and learning about his work, he says, well, surely you know about this book. And I go, no, I don't know about this book. He says, well, it's written by a political scientist, Donald Stokes. And I said, well, give me a copy and I'll read it. And I haven't been the same since. In a lot of ways, what happens when you read something like this and you reflect back on it, you say, well, I've been doing that my whole life. I just didn't know it. That's the kind of book it is. So what is his book about? The book is about the intellectual idea, intellectual history that privileges pure science over applied science. Where does that come from? If we read Plato and we're reading about the forms, what is a form? A form is the abstract representation of something perfect. Reality is always imperfect. Anytime you're studying reality, it's a mix of things. The form itself is pure. And so there's a separation in Platonic thought, in Greek classical intellectual thought, that there are things that are like beauty, perfect in conception, but everything that you might actually touch is somehow contaminated by impurity and confusion and complexity. And so if you think about this, then you think about how do we develop knowledge? We develop knowledge best by asking people to think abstractly, rewarding people who have the ability to think abstractly, and then to not confine their creativity in doing that thinking. Because the second you focus your attention on some immediate problem, the creativity is as important as getting the problem solved. And so there are two corollaries of thinking that go between pure, the advantages of pure science, and the disadvantages of applied science that relate to this loss of creativity if you confine your thought to something specific, and the belief that if you try to mix pure and applied research, the applied research will always drive out the pure. The need to get to the answer will be much more important than how did we get to the answer? How did it work? This wouldn't be interesting, really, unless you were an intellectual historian. But it is interesting when you think about how did we decide to support science in the United States after World War II, when the Cold War began and Sputnik went up. We started tracking Nick Lovrich in the LA City schools to be an electrical engineer. And we said, okay, we are going to invest huge amounts of federal money in science education in the United States. And this book describes exactly the documentation of how this decision played out in the U.S. Congress, U.S. government. So the game plan was, okay, we will create major science through government funding, but it will not be by creating great national laboratories. And scientists will not be government employees in national laboratories. We will give vast sums of money to universities. These are the same universities that after World War II, and all the people come home from the Pacific and from European theaters, and we create the GI Bill that says, if you fought, if you wore a uniform, then we will pay for your college education. You come. And we're expanding universities, and we're expanding enrollments, and they're growing, and we're expanding the government financing of science education. What is the model of science education? The model of science education is we're going to give money to universities to hire people to do the science. They will not be employees of the government, they will be university professors. If they are doing research for the government, their universities will get to charge overhead, indirect cost. And we will finance the building of universities through the indirect cost of the research done by scientists. That's a huge amount of money. At Stanford University, for example, if you get a $100,000 grant, you get a $100,000 match for the university. The researcher gets $100,000 to spend, the university gets $100,000 to support the laboratories of that scientist doing that work. This is how we built monumental universities that do incredible research with federal money, but the government isn't telling them how to do it. The idea was you cannot constrict creativity by directing the science. We will invest in physics, chemistry, biology, all of the sciences, medical sciences included, without directing the nature of the research. Who decides who gets the grant money? It needs to be a process, and we created the National Science Foundation. The process is peer review, scientists judging scientists on what projects are worthy of funding. Where is the frontier of knowledge? Who gets to decide who gets the big grant to push that frontier forward? Not a government agency, but a panel of peers who are summoned to DC every year to assess all the applications for science. That process is emulated everywhere. But it's in the context of these beliefs that pure research is better than applied research. That if you try to mix applied research and pure research, the pure research will be driven out and it'll all be applied and misdirected. In the case of the US government, the fear among scientists was that instead of having scientists decide what needs to be studied, politicians would decide it. And the politicians would say, half the science needs to be in Texas, and half the science needs to be here, and half the science, and then they didn't want to politicize science. They wanted to have science driving science. So this to you going into the university setting, to going into the professoriate, looking for a mentor or being a mentor. You have to understand, how did the organization of our universities take the shape it did? When you hire a new person in physics at Sam Houston State University, I imagine their startup money, that is what they get to set up their lab, is something around $750,000, something like that. When you hire a startup new faculty member in criminal justice, I don't think you got $750,000, probably not. Why is that? Why do we do that? Why does the university privilege some kind of research over another type of research in that way, to that extent? Well, if I'm the president and I'm running a university, and I know that somebody can be brought in chemistry that has the right lab and generate 10 years of research at $5 million, why would I not want to put my money there as opposed to someone in criminal justice or political science, where they're, over a lifetime, they might make, $10 million of research? That's just the way we've decided to structure the support of science, and it continues to be there. Now, are you hearing me now? Because I can hear myself, sometimes I can't hear it. Stokes said, something is fundamentally wrong here, because we are losing funding in NSF to another area of government support that looks at this problem completely differently than we do. And we in social sciences finally got some NSF money. When the money started going down for NSF, that's when social science got some access to that money. It said, look at the health sciences. How are the health sciences organized? They don't have the same distaste for applied research as characterizes the established disciplines. The National Institutes for Health have much more of a problem-focused approach to research. They have panels that have a high requirement for addressing what are the major health concerns at the time that are documented, and then what is the research that needs to be directed toward those programs. So if you have, for example, juvenile diabetes shows up to be an incredible cost to the healthcare system, then you start driving research toward prevention, treatment, eradication of the consequences of juvenile diabetes. And then you go to Congress and you ask for money. And instead of asking for the freedom of people in science to study whatever they want to study, you say, we're asking for money to do something about juvenile diabetes, and this is the cost that we're going to reduce on the healthcare system, you have a lot more success in sustaining the research money. So this was Donald Stokes at NSF saying, now I get it. We've been suffering the consequences of having defined research as a dichotomy. There's pure research and there's applied research. In reality, it's a 2x2 matrix that we ought to be thinking about. On the one dimension, do you foresee productive use of the research that you're doing? And the answer could be no. This is not for productive use. So the answer could be yes, it is for productive use. And on the other dimension, the question is, are you looking for fundamental understanding, or you're not looking for fundamental understanding in the research you're doing? He says, here's some examples. You can be in a quadrant that he calls pure basic research. You can be Sir Isaac Newton. And you can be asked the question, now, are you doing your research because you want to accomplish some goal? He says, no. I'm doing the research because I want fundamental understanding. Why does matter behave this way? From the level of the atom to the level of the universe, there must be a consistent, uniform reality. That's what I'm looking for. All nature is structured in a way we can understand, human beings can understand. And it is rule-bound behavior, every particle. And I don't know where it's going. Don't bother me with doing something with that information. We just need to know this information. So he would call that pure basic. Productive use, that's not the goal. Fundamental understanding, that's the goal. He said, now I can contrast that with Thomas Edison. And Thomas Edison is in the quadrant he would call productive use, yes. Quest for fundamental understanding, I don't really care. So Edison said, my goal is to figure out how to generate, transport, and make use of electricity. I need light bulbs, I need wires, I need to know what it takes to capture energy in that form and make use of it someplace else. Do I care, which way the electrons are moving and why? I don't really care. My goal is to be the first one to be able to put electricity to productive use in the lighting of cities and the running of machines. And I know that there's lots of engineering that needs to be done. How to generate it, alternating current, direct current, all these things. I don't really have a preference on knowing why it's happening. I just want to know, how do I solve this problem to get to that problem, to get to that problem, to get to that problem. So that's also legitimate activity, but it's not for fundamental understanding. But there is a quadrant. And he says, this is Louis Pasteur's quadrant. His problem is contamination of food and people getting sick and bacteria that cause illness. And it's transported in milk, which kids drink and get sick. So the goal is to not have kids getting sick from contaminated food. But to do that, you have to understand bacteriology. You have to develop a science that will explain which bacteria are noxious to human beings and which are not, which are actually productive of health. So to Pasteur, there's no dividing point between pure and applied. To accomplish the goal in problem-driven science, you have to develop more science. Usually, not one science, but many. Many sciences are involved in solving the problem. So, what does Donald Stokes do with that insight? He says, I realize that we have underinvested in applied sciences in the United States. That includes criminal justice, it includes public administration. Areas of human knowledge, fundamental understanding that are generally connected to problem-driven research rather than pure research, and therefore underinvested in how we decide who should have resources to work. As the nation takes on harder and harder problems, more and more difficult issues to deal with, the problems are seldom definable by one discipline or even a small number of disciplines. The problems are monumental and require many points of view. Global climate change would be an example. If we are in fact experiencing human-caused global climate change, then the solution to that is in every area of science, in transportation science, energy certainly, atmospheric research. All of that work, however, will require changing public policy. It'll require people changing their behavior. So how is the problem going to be solved if it's not solved by social science and physical science and biological science working in tandem? That's where NSF funding is going. That's a tribute to Donald Stokes reconceptualizing this dichotomy, this continuum into a 2x2 matrix, and saying the highest area of benefit for applying national resources is in Pasteur's Quadrant, in the very area where I think criminal justice and public administration reside. When I read this book, I had an epiphany. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. It's a religious term when figures that are great in our history of our religion have an aha moment and they discover something. It's like a revelation from God, epiphany, that, yes, why didn't I see this before? This was an epiphany for me to read this book, because I think this is what I've been doing with my students and didn't know it all these years. Finding a question that practitioners care about and finding the theories that inadequately address the knowledge needed to do a better job in the criminal justice system, that's really where the best criminal justice is being done, in my view. I read a piece when Jeremy Travis left as the director of NIJ, and he was reflecting on his experience. And he said, what's really, really sad is that we have brilliant people in universities who seldom talk to people who are running police agencies or managing courts or managing correctional institutions. It's like they're in two different worlds, relating to two different types of realities, when the reality is the performance of the criminal justice system. When I came on campus here and I saw the potential for you to bridge that gap here at Sam Houston State University, I didn't think anything like this existed. Solomon told me it was like this, but I didn't believe him. But it is like this. The potential is here to be in Pasteur's Quadrant in criminal justice in a very, very big way, and I think you should take advantage of it. When I read this book, I thought back about the arguments we have in my discipline, public administration, between theory and practice. The people who are professors of public administration like to do theory. And why do they like to do theory? Because other people in their pure versions in political science think unless you're doing theory, you're not doing anything really realistic. The students that come from government to get their master's in public administration always ask, why do we have to learn so much theory? We just want to go and do a better job running the agency, and you're giving us all this theory. Well, the theory and practice nexus is really where you want to be. You want to do master's degrees in public administration in Pasteur's Quadrant and bring theory and practice together more than it happens. And I thought, great book. Another epiphany moment. I watched the evaluation research develop over time. After we created the War on Poverty, we created a need to evaluate programs designed to end poverty in the United States. And at first, sociologists mainly and economists were active in that area, And the very best ones wouldn't touch it. Ah, that's applied work. Ah, has nothing to do with my discipline. Let somebody, the lesser types, go do evaluation research. So I saw Peter Rossi and other people take on the challenge and said, well, let's try to do evaluation research exactly like we would do our field studies research, and then it'll be just the same. And then more people came along and like Patton and said, no. This area is ripe for collaboration. If you got practitioners and evaluation designers, researchers, scientists to work together to iterate over time, what is the most timely information needed and how does it get developed, and we can turn an organization into a learning organization collecting information, we'd all be better off. But it's really a collaboration. It's not an external expert coming in and passing judgment on a program. I've seen all of these things thrive in Pasteur's Quadrant. Evaluation research now is in its third or fourth decade, and it's extremely sophisticated, highly variated, lots of people who are very, very good researchers developing promising and evidence-based practices in criminal justice and other fields based on sound information. We see the development of experimental designs and quasi-experimental designs of the type that Solomon's doing with the Houston PD, and that information will in time be archived and cataloged, and we will have lots of digital resources to draw on so people can look at the same data later on in retrospect and then improve their work. I think Stokes saw something right before he died that is of really great importance to the applied areas of social science like criminal justice and public administration. And so I hope that when this is over, you'll run out and buy a copy of this book. I happen to have one available for you if you want to buy it now for $50, but you can buy it cheaper. I'm just kidding. So, aside from recommending this book, let me give you I'll conclude with my reflections. I call this Reflections of an Old Hand at what works in doctoral student mentoring in Pasteur's Quadrant. That would be reflecting on my experience. Now you have to realize this is an N of one problem. This is just me. These are insights drawn from one person with a limited range of experience, and my background is what it is. A first-generation college person with a naive sense of how wonderful universities are and all of those things you want to put in perspective. But I think there are four key factors that are important to consider in choosing a mentor or choosing how to mentor. My experience is my own, and my discussions with other people that I respect also inform what I'm going to say about these four factors. I've been working with the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources at WSU for about 10 years on a problem they had where their faculty were not making tenure. And the question was faculty mentoring of junior faculty and giving advice on how senior faculty have an obligation to help junior faculty make it through that process more effectively. And I've done a modest amount of research on the subjects because I've been lucky enough to be recognized as a mentor. In my view, these four things are the critical things. Number one, I call it matching up. Matching up it takes two to tango, a mentor and a mentee. Nobody can force you to be a mentor. Nobody can force you to choose someone as your mentor. There has to be some kind of kindred spirit there. But for faculty members, it is really important not to make that door so narrow that you only work with a very small number of students who need your help. Faculty have a duty to serve. There are students who aren't immediately appealing to work with, who it takes time to provide an opportunity. And you do have a duty to help, if you can, people who need it when they're forming their professional self. It's really, really important that a lot of the students that I have developed mentorship relationship with, I didn't really like very much at the start. I didn't like Solomon, for example, very much. I didn't like Courtney very much. But you grow if you leave your door open instead of making it very narrow. Involve yourself. Get involved with students, and you'll find out sometimes that a student who at first is not easy to work with really has something that is very important to bring out, and a lifetime relationship with that student. You can explore it together, and you have an invaluable partner in life. I think this is particularly the case for students from abroad. It's hard to deal with language issues sometimes, and you can't really have a clear understanding what the interest is. The patience is even more important for students from abroad, to get to know them well enough so that you can make that connection. And I can tell you from personal experience, the payoffs are fantastic. I think students from abroad have a sense of obligation and loyalty that is different from American culture in a good way. And I've been definitely the beneficiary of that. A second big factor, maintaining proper distance. This is really easy to say and extremely hard to do. Okay, maintaining proper distance. And every book you read on mentoring has this big section, and then rambles all around on, okay, don't be too close, don't be mother hen, don't be too distant, standoffish, be something in the middle. Well, geez, anybody can do that. But really, the important part of this thing about what kind of relationship and how close and how distant to have it is you have to listen. You have to listen very, very closely to do two things. What's the potential there behind the lack of experience that the student has? And what liabilities or limits does the student have? They just can't do numbers or whatever it is. You have to listen well enough to understand how to do the really important part of mentoring. That is, how to build confidence in that student that they can do it, and then how to craft appropriate goals that are challenging but not too much, not impossible to achieve. That takes a lot of listening. Sometimes you have to be a little closer. Sometimes you can do it a little more distant. But the relationship needs to be one of an honest relationship between a senior person and a junior person. Not friends. I'm not your advocate. I'm not your defender. I'm a teacher, and the teacher has to have that distance. But it can't be so far that you can't listen, hear, and really figure out what that student can do. And then if you can figure it out, you have the benefit of experience. You have the benefit of seeing hundreds of students before that student. They don't have any of that. They're relying on you to reflect on your experience. You say, yeah, I remember setting a goal for a student and it was too high. And it fed back on lack of confidence. That's no good. So you have to adjust that. The students should grow in confidence, not on dependence. They shouldn't become dependent on you. They should become more and more independent. And sometimes that's pretty painful when you're working on something and one of your favorite students comes in, like Courtney, and says, well, Dr. Lovrich, that's not the best science anymore. They do it better this way. When they measure fear of crime, they don't do it like you're doing it. Oh, thank you, Courtney. I appreciate that. That's good. That makes you a better teacher. If you get offended at that or you can't handle that, and it's kind of hard to handle, but it's a good thing. That's the distance we're talking about. It has to be somehow respectful, mutually supportive, but your experience is something that the student needs really badly. You need that student to grow and make you look like a good teacher. So it's mutually beneficial, but it's hard to do. The third major factor I call managing networks. The literature that I've seen and the experience that I've had tells me that the mentors that are the most successful know a lot of people, have worked with a lot of people, and are willing to share that network of contacts with the people that they're working with at the time. And that means going to conferences, keeping in touch, reviewing a lot of manuscripts for people, and showing the students that you're working with how invaluable that is. Most of the time when a student works on a project, I've seen this so many times, and they develop some data, they don't want anyone to have it. This is my data and I don't want anybody to use it. That's exactly the wrong thing. If you have data and there are 20 people around the country working in that area, send them an email. I have this data. You want to share or look at it? What kind of data do you have? That's really 10 times more powerful than being the only one to get to play with the data that you have, really. It's hard to get over that idea, but that's what this networking is about. That's what your profession is about. Opportunities come from this network. You get feedback on the work you're doing. When it comes to job placement, people recognize your name. They recognize the names of the people that are recommending you. You get early exposure to explaining your ideas to other people. And then all these other people are in the same boat you are. They're trying to make a career in criminal justice too. And they give good advice and good experience. Finally, fourth area, maintaining contact and support. Unfortunately, mentoring is a lifelong obligation and a very special type of relationship. When you have a mentor-mentee relationship, it doesn't end with graduation and putting on a robe and going off and getting a job. It continues. And your obligation as a mentee is to visit your mentor when they go to the nursing home. It is your duty to do so. I have a form now that I require all my students to fill out that they will come and visit me when my wife puts me in the nursing home. And they have to do two things. They have to bring chocolate and Scotch whiskey. And no, I think this is really, I watch my favorite person, he's not my mentor, he's just someone I admire, is Jim Short, who was here for a time. And he was president of the American Sociological Society, president of the American Criminology Society, bon vivant, goes to all the meetings still today. And he has people, I watch him at a conference, hundreds of people come to pay their respects to him. And wow, we just named a building after him on WSU campus. So some of his students came to that dedication ceremonies. And these are students that were mentored by Jim 20, 30 years ago. And they came from across the country with their kids to meet him. Wow. That's a great, I will never have the reputation of Jim Short, But boy, what a wonderful thing to be using as a goal. Now, that's the end of my formal remarks, and I'm happy to answer questions. But I wanted to point out one more thing. I see troubling signs on the horizon for mentoring. When I first started teaching, the norm in a academic department was for everyone to be in their office every day, and you didn't have office hours. You worked in your office, and you were there frequently, and you interacted with your colleagues daily. And graduate students had access to faculty routinely, and I've seen that culture disappear, and a new culture. People work at home. They work through the computer. They don't spend very much time in their office. And it's really hard for graduate students to interact with faculty because they're never there, basically. And so that the form of interaction that takes place tends to be more formal, written, or episodic email rather than really listening, figuring out what the potentialities are of that student, what the limitations are, how to build confidence and set appropriate goals. And that interaction isn't very frequent, and so it's hard to get that element of mentoring going. I would find it hard myself if I was back in graduate school to figure out who would be an appropriate mentor, because the opportunities for interaction are not very frequent. So, if you're going to build the capacity to take advantage of what you have at Sam Houston State University, you have the perfect setting for research in Pasteur's Quadrant with all of the access you have to data and people and professionals. Your graduate students and faculty need to interact, I think, more than by email and in a lot of frequency to have the benefit of strong mentor relationships developing. Now, I don't want to tell you how to run your school. I didn't come here to do that. But this is my reflection on what I see as a potential problem. If people don't think about it enough, you won't end up with these kinds of relationships where people will actually come to visit you in the nursing home and bring you chocolate and scotch. Well, that's the end of my remarks, and I'm absolutely happy to take questions.
Everything you said except the last one was great. I work at home, through the computer, but we'll talk about that in a minute. We've got about 10 minutes before the formal 11 o'clock hour comes. And so questions from the floor real quickly, and then remember the doctoral students, you will have time immediately afterwards to follow up with questions as well. And we can stay and linger a little bit longer if it takes longer to get through questions and answers. Please, if you ask your question, shout it out, and Lovrich, if you will also, please rephrase the question so that it might get on the mic. We need Edison or Westinghouse or someone here.
I'm getting it on tape, so it's...
You've got it.
I didn't get the fourth factor.
You remain connected.
Remain connected.
There's a lifetime obligation to keep it on. So if you don't take it on lightly, because if you don't like this person, they'll bug you for the next 25 years, So every time I look at my thing and it says Solomon's calling, I take it off. I'm just kidding. Now, you have to realize I'm 65 years old. I'm from a generation before people got used to electronic communication. So I know that there are many, many people who have a very big network people, all of whom they've not met. They've only interacted with by email or reading each other's work, and it's probably possible to do that very effectively. I'm an old-fashioned person. I like to spend FaceTime. But I think there's something important about enough FaceTime to build a sense of confidence to share. It's really hard to share reality with your mentor if you're always putting on the best light. You know, there's a point at which you have to be really honest with each other. This is what I think you can do. This is what, can you really do that? What you're saying you can do. That has to come in the relationship at some point. And if that's there, you can build on that. You can always find assets that are ones that you can strengthen and build on. And I think that's a part of human nature. You wouldn't be in graduate studies if you didn't have the assets to be developed. Yeah, I like the fact that you have this series, and I should thank the benefactors of the university for making it possible. I think things like this are not part of your curriculum where you're going to be studying an article about it, but it's really important for your professional development to think about it and think about it as a group. And if you want to promote it, I know we had in our College of Agriculture, we had junior faculty leaving untenured. We had graduate students not finishing their dissertations. And so the dean asked me to come and say, well, why are we having this problem? So I had them describe, how their interactions are. And I went to look, and there was no faculty in their office. And the graduate students are down in the corner office telling rumors about how bad all the faculty are and all that. I said, geez, no wonder nobody's finishing here. What do you ever bridge that gap? Well, no, we haven't even thought about it. The consequences are you have a lot of alienated people who are not connected to your program. They're not connected to each other. They're not, do you have people helping you place your people anywhere? No, we really don't have that system. That's really a bad thing. To get to be a #1 program, in my view, you hire really fantastic faculty, and then you bring in students to work with that faculty. If they're two separate tracks, that's not as strong as if the two are intertwined. And I think that's really where.
Questions? I'm going to ask a question then, since nobody's jumping out of their seats, and it's really more about your sense of Pasteur's Quadrant. It seems that your presentation is that we need all of the different scientific disciplines in essence to begin kind of collaborating and working together if possible. One of my mentors was Edward Sagerman. And if you're not familiar with Ed Sagerman, I'll recommend a book, the title of which is Roscommon and Others. And what he has done is he's drawing from literature and informing criminal justice policy through that. And I'm wondering if there's room in Pasteur's Quadrant for non-scientists, and if so, how do you think we better integrate novelists or poets or songwriters?
You're not as much of a positivist as I am, so I'll be gentle. They really haven't thought about it. And I think that's also a very important part of why the medical sciences are better than we are. I was listening to NPR yesterday or day before, and they were interviewing medical doctors who write novels. And fascinating. What is it about medical science that attracts so many brilliant people? They want to know what human life is about. Well, that doesn't happen just on the parts of your body that are going bad. It happens all up here in your experience. And when they get the freedom to work outside of the bounds of medical science to think about healing and people and understanding your craft, they can do fantastic insight. And treatment, how it informs how a doctor relates to patients is a critical thing. I think that's an unexplored area. That might be another quadrant yet beyond Pasteur's quadrant. It's hard enough to get people into that quadrant who are on opposite sides of the, well, just give me money to do chemistry versus I'm going to fix the airport security problem with my machine and my analytical chemical process.
Okay, well, why don't we take a quick break? I don't know what time it is right now.